Hello, welcome to the first of the Stage Tech Digital Subtitle Training series of videos. My name is Ollie, I'm the Program Systems Manager here at Stage Tech, and I manage the Digital Subtitle Program. So if you ever have any questions on digital subtitling and you want to come to, I'll have my email up at the end of every video so you can take that down for any questions. But hello, hi, thanks for tuning into these videos. Given the current situation with COVID-19, many have shifted their focus to their online offering. So we have decided to create these videos and put them out to the public for free for the time being to encourage those who maybe don't have the resources for professional subtitling to create accessible subtitles themselves, so that people who are deaf and hard of hearing can take part in all the stuff that's going on online right now. This training is usually a paid for session, but we're putting it out for free. So if you find this useful, please consider donating to Stage Tech so that we can continue to offer as much advice and support as we can and work to ensure deaf people are included as the world turns to the arts sector for entertainment and comfort. There will be a link in the description. Thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background about Stage Tech. Stage Tech is a charity that was founded in the year 2000 by three people who all had their own various levels of hearing loss. It originally set out to advocate and support captioning in theatre, and since then has grown to include the talks and tours, which is live subtitling for museums and galleries, and now of course digital program. As I mentioned, we're a charity and we supply access to the arts for deaf and hard of hearing people through subtitles and captioning. So this series of videos will consist of 6 videos, and they're going to cover the following topics: who benefits, benefits of subtitles, how are people using subtitles, subtitles in your organization, subtitle best practice, and step-by-step subtitling. The topics that we cover in these videos are usually presented in one training session altogether. It's important to understand all the different aspects of all this to ensure that the subtitles you create are accessible to deaf audiences, and to give you the skills and knowledge to make informed decisions for you and your organization, as opposed to sort of a generic checklist which might not take your specific needs into account. So do make sure that you do watch all of these, because it will really give you that kind of skill to make decisions taking everything into account. So let's just go straight into it with the first section, who benefits. We're going to talk a little bit about deaf people as a whole here, because as it turns out, deaf people aren't all the same. There's quite a few different types, and we're going to go through the different kind of lingo around deaf people here. On the screen, you'll see a little graphic. We're going to go through that now. So this shows the different kinds of deaf people and the different skills and the different types of access that benefit them through these skills. First of all, we have capital D deaf. So capital D deaf is a specific group of people who identify as deaf people and the deaf community. These are people who tend to use sign language as their first language, and they have a strong sense of identity around the word deaf. They see themselves more as a linguistic minority rather than a disabled minority. As far as they're concerned, the reason they can't access things is because they speak a different language. They speak BSL, not English, because the two are actually not identical. There are differences in the grammatical structure and the language. So just because somebody knows English doesn't mean they'll know BSL, and just because somebody knows BSL doesn't mean they'll know English. They're not the same. So for a person who uses BSL as their first language, if they can't access a video, it's because the person is speaking a different language, in the same way that someone who is French might not access a video that's in English if they don't know English. It's just a different language. People who are capital D deaf, who use sign language as a first language, they're often born deaf or lose the majority of their hearing at a young age. Obviously, this is not always the case. People could be born just a little bit deaf, still having most of their hearing, and we'll come into that type later on. But yeah, so they will lose their hearing from a young age, and so they grow up using BSL as their first language. Obviously, for people who use sign language, the best form of access is signed access interpretation. So it is really important to include BSL. we focus on captioning and subtitling here at Stage Tech, but that's never to say that BSL is not important. It is important, and you do need to consider BSL as well, because there are people who do rely on it and who don't access captions as well. Moving on, lowercase d deaf. So these are people who will become deaf at a young age, or maybe a little bit later on in life, sort of like before the teen years, or they will have some hearing. Because they have grown up with hearing for a few years at least, or they have just about enough hearing, they will often pick up English, spoken English and written English as their first language, because they had the experience with it, or because they have just enough hearing to be able to pick up on it. This is actually where I fit in. I'm a deaf person, I wear hearing aids, and I was born with a hearing loss, and I was just about on the borderline between signing and speaking, and my family are all hearing, so the decision was made that I would be taught to speak. That's where I am, just to give you a bit of context of where I fit into all this. As I mentioned there, sometimes people who fit into this group can pick up sign language because, it's very close, and there's not like a distinct line really, it's just kind of like, it's vague. But they will also often pick up lip reading, and again, they will often use speech along with hearing aids. And so obviously for these people who have the English skills, the written English skills, the best access is text-based access, written English, captions, subtitles, because they can see it there, unless they also have some vision impairment as well. Moving on again, people who are deafened, this is people who will lose their hearing later on in life, sort of about, 30s, around there. And usually due to accident or illness or a noisy work environment. So, working in the military or a factory where the noise can cause damage to their hearing. Because these people have spent, the first 20, 30 years of their lives just being a hearing person, chances are they don't know BSL, and they're not going to then pick it up at this stage in their lives. So again, they already have the English skills. They might pick up lip reading, but chances are they will rely on a hearing aid and the English skills. And again, for them, the best form of access will be captioning and subtitling, because they can read the English. And then people who are hard of hearing, this is people who lose their hearing through old age. So we all know who this is. This is your grandparents who, they're getting on a little bit and they're turning up the volume on the TV and they think it's too quiet, and you're saying it's at max volume, please turn it down. We all have someone like this in our lives. And that's just how, the ears are as they get older. People start to lose their hearing. And again, when you're, in your 60s and your hearing starting to go, it's unlikely that you're going to pick up BSL. Most people don't want to, but they will have, again, those existing English skills. So they will often use hearing aids, sometimes pick up lip reading, not always, but the most importantly, the best form of access for these people, again, is subtitles, because it's written down, it's using skills they already know. So this is why Stage Techs focus on text-based access. It provides the most access for the most amount of people. And this shows really that access isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. People have a range of skills and a range of capabilities, and access needs to work within that. You can't expect every person who knows BSL to pick up English just so they can access whatever it is you're putting out there. You need to work within what they want to do and what they're capable of. So access really is a multi-pronged effort, and you have to think about all these different ways that people can access your content. But we're going to focus on subtitling. So a study in 2015 by Action on Hearing Loss found that there was around 11 million people in the UK who are deaf and hard of hearing. That's 1 in 6 people, which actually is quite a lot if you think about it. If you look around the room, maybe not right now, you're all at home, but in any sort of room, there'll be a handful of people. Chances are some of them are deaf. Obviously in this room, there's one person, and this one person is deaf, so not quite the same there, but you know what I mean. If this was in a room where I was doing this presentation in person, I would be the deaf person there. In terms of how this reflects on your audience, if you're a small theatre, there's 100 people, there'll be 16 of them who are deaf. If it's an exhibition and you get 1,000 people coming through your doors, that's 166 people who are deaf. And if it's a YouTube video with 10,000 views, 1,666 people are deaf. And if there's no subtitles, then they're experiencing reduced access. Of these 11 million people, 4 million of them are working age, so that's between 16 and 64. And 7 million of them are retirement age, that's above 65. So those are both huge audiences to bear in mind, obviously, depending on who it is you're targeting. If you're targeting people who are, older, 7 million people. If you're targeting people who are younger, 4 million people, you need to think about it. Of those 11 million people that we just talked about, less than 1% of them are fluent in British Sign Language. And this just to reinforce the point that I made earlier about how it's not just about BSL, it's not just about captioning, you need both. But again, this is why stage text focus on captioning. More people will benefit from captioning than from BSL. Not to pit them against each other, but yes, it provides the most amount of access. Often we see a lot of people who think, right, deaf access, BSL, tick. I personally, as a deaf person, I'll go to things and I'll say, what kind of access is there? And say, we've got a BSL interpreter doing this. And it's like, well, that's great, but I don't know BSL, so I can't benefit from that. And since it's not subtitled, I can't partake in this, so bye. Obviously, it's not great for them, it's not great for me. As a user, a visitor, subtitling is important. Age-related hearing loss, so we talked a bit about older people. This is the same action on hearing loss study again. It found that 40% of people over 50 and 70% of people over 70 will experience some form of age-related hearing loss. That's a lot. That is a lot of people. It used to be that I was the only deaf person in my family, and now both my granddads, my dad, my uncle, they all wear hearing aids. They're all losing their hearing because they're just getting older. Now, of course, they think, Ollie, I understand how hard this must have been for you now. Not quite the same, growing up with it and losing it in your old age, but they're starting to appreciate more about background noise and how important that is. And we all have a relative, I'm sure, who is losing their hearing. Even if it's not extreme, it's something, and it can have a real impact on their life. Looking at another study by ACE in 2016, ACE found that 76% of older people enjoy arts and culture. That's 3/4. 3 out of 4 older people enjoy arts and culture, and it's important to making them feel happy. If you combine that with the last statistic of 40% of people over 50, that means that almost a third of people over 50 enjoy the arts and have an access requirement. It's come down to 30.4%, which is a huge chunk of people. That's a third of your audience if you are targeting older people who enjoy the arts and require access. So you don't want to be cutting them out. And this is actually still true in digital. There's the old sort of stereotype that older people don't know anything about technology and the internet, but it's just not true. There's a growing population of silver surfers who are more comfortable and more confident using technology. My grandmother, for example, keeps sending me YouTube videos, really random YouTube videos. You all know what I'm talking about. They all do it. So yeah, this still is true of digital and online content. And this population is predicted to increase. We're an aging population. People are living longer due to advances in medicine. And because people are living longer, they're more likely to experience age-related hearing loss. So the prediction by Action on Hearing Loss is that by 2035, that figure of 1 in 6, 11 million, will have raised to 15.6 million and come to 1 in 5 people. And also the World Health Organization has said that 1.1 billion adults globally are at risk of hearing loss due to headphones, music too loud, too long, all day. And a 2015 study found that 41.9% of teenagers are exposed to hazardous levels of noise during leisure activities. And what this means is that there's kind of an investment to be made when making content accessible. If you subtitle a video now, it will still be accessible to deaf audiences in 2035, unless as a whole we've completely stopped speaking English and changed the language that we use. But I think that's unlikely. It's only 15 years away. But yeah, subtitle a video now, and in 15 years it will still be subtitled. It will still be accessible. There will still be 1 in 5 people who can access it. Despite this growing population, there's still lots of stigma around being deaf. And so a lot of people often don't identify themselves as having access needs for a variety of reasons. They don't realize it yet, they don't want to. For some people it can be a sign of getting older, which a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And sometimes it's because the loss is so gradual that they don't even notice that every week they're turning the TV up a little bit louder until, a few months down the line, it's twice as loud as they used to have it, and they still can't hear it as well. Another example of this from my personal life, we told my dad to get his hearing checked for years and years and years because he kept, asking us to repeat ourselves or acting like he had heard us and then not responding to what we said. And eventually he got his hearing checked, and lo and behold, now he's wearing hearing aids. But even now, when he's got hearing aids, he often forgets to wear them. I'll be with him and he'll say, "I can't hear you," and I'll say, "Are you wearing your hearing aids?" And he's not. And when we watch TV, he doesn't watch TV with subtitles unless I'm there. He won't watch it with subtitles for himself. And it's really odd because I was born deaf. So he's had a deaf person in his life for the past 27 years, and he still can't quite accept it for himself. So even though I've been there and he's watched all that, and so surely hasn't got any sort of stigma around it, he still can't identify in himself and identify as a deaf person. Action on hearing loss found that on average it takes 10 years from when someone first notices that they have a hearing loss to when they ask their doctor for help. That is a decade in between when they realise there's something wrong with my hearing to when they ask a doctor, "Can you help me with my hearing?" That's a long time. And that is in a sort of private, confidential space. Imagine these same people coming up to your box office or tweeting you or emailing you and saying, "I have an access need, please provide subtitles." They're not necessarily going to do it. Sometimes people don't want to out themselves as being deaf or disabled, and we shouldn't make them have to. We should allow them to do that. And what this means is that people who don't identify as deaf people aren't going to be looking at your access page, and they're not going to be asking you what's accessible, what access can you provide. And so this is why we advocate for open captioning, and why we say that captioning and access needs to be preemptive. It needs to be there before people ask for it, because there will be people who want to use it who are not asking for it. So just sort of go into a little bit of open captioning versus closed captioning. So closed captioning is what people will tend to imagine when they think of subtitles. It's what you have on Netflix, YouTube. There's a little button, you press it, and the subtitles appear for you as the viewer, but not for anyone else who is also watching the same thing at the same time. It's called closed captioning because it's closed to just you, the viewer, and you, the viewer, have to go and take a step for it to be there. So I have to turn the subtitles on, whereas my friend, who is a hearing person, does not have to turn the subtitles on. They can just watch it. Open captioning is where the subtitles are there. They are already on. So it's like when you might go to see a foreign film, like Parasite, the subtitles are just there. You don't go into the cinema and say, "I need to see the screening with the subtitles," not the screening without the subtitles, because there aren't any. They've all got the subtitles. And what this means is that I can go in, and my friend who is a hearing person can go in, and we can sit next to each other, get our ticket, get our snack, and we just have the same experience. I as a deaf person, don't have to do anything differently. I just get to be there and have a fun time. And for people who don't identify as having an access need, people who don't want to out themselves as having an access need, people who just want to go in with their friend and have a fun time, open captioning is what they need, because they get to experience it and they get to access it. The access is there without them having to do anything differently from what they used to do, what they normally would do. The access needs to be there, openly available from step one, because not everyone is going to ask for it. And under the social model of disability, disability is caused by barriers created by society. So it is society's responsibility to remove those barriers. It is not the individual's responsibility to ask us to remove those barriers. We should be taking them out in advance. And at the end of the day, if people have access requirements and are asking for access, it's still going to benefit their experience. Even if they're not asking for subtitles, if they would benefit from subtitles, but they're not there and they don't even know that they would benefit from it, they're going to have a less experience. And if they don't know that because they're not getting the access, then they're just going to say, I didn't like that exhibition, I thought it was bad, I didn't understand any of it. And it's not what you want. You don't want them telling that to their friends. So in that way, access will benefit you because it gives visitors a better visitor experience. To back this up, it was found that there's nearly 7 million people in the UK who could benefit from hearing aids. Only half of these people actually have them. The other half either have not been to a doctor or they do have them but they don't use them, which means that there's 3 million people who have an access need, would benefit from hearing aids and don't have hearing aids or don't use their hearing aids, like my dad. And for these people, again, the subtitles, the access that you could provide would give them that experience, but they're not going to ask for it. If they're not even going to do hearing aids for their own benefit, then they're not going to ask you to subtitle your videos. And so that will have a detrimental impact on their experience of your video, and they may not even know why. Okay, so we're now going to look at an audiology graph. I know it looks scary, don't worry, I'll talk you through it. This is what you will see when you do a hearing test. So I've seen tons of these throughout the years, so I'm gonna guide you through it. Okay, so on the y-axis, you have the volume in decibels. So that is how loud or quiet it is. So at the top bit, we've got leaves, birds chirping, and then at the bottom, we've got, a drill, drums, a plane, loud things. And on the x-axis along the top, we've got the frequency in hertz. And this is how low or high pitch it is. So on the left side, you've got a lorry, or again, the drill. Whereas on the right side, you've got the bird, you've got, engines, which have this sort of whining noise. And so this sort of maps out as a whole sound. Through the variety of pitches and volumes, we just have all the sounds that exist in the world. And everything can be sort of plotted on there. This sort of blue lump in the middle represents human speech. Now, do you notice it's kind of a large blob rather than a specific line or a dot? And this is because human speech isn't uniform. Everyone's got a different voice and different intonation and accents and all these kind of things, which change how a sound might sound and how when they speak. But generally, all sort of sounds tend to be inside of there. So for example, you've got sounds like M, which is kind of a lower pitch, sort of middling volume M, and then you've got a sound like S, which is quieter and higher pitch. So these are on completely different points of the graph. When you do a hearing test, what they do is they put like headphones on you and they play a pitch in one ear that they call a true tone, and it's just a pitch, and they play it at a loud volume. And when you hear it, you press a button and say, yeah, I heard that. And they do it at a quieter volume, and you press the button at a quieter volume, and so on and so forth. And the goal of that is to find what is the lowest volume that you can hear for each pitch. Yeah, and they do that through the pitches, and they switch over to the other side, and they do the same thing. It's very tedious, but that's what it does. And what they can map from that is the threshold of your hearing. What is the lowest volume that you can hear each pitch at across the range? And that creates the kind of line that you see on the graph, okay? That is the threshold of this person's hearing. The red line and the blue line usually means one is for the right ear and one is for the left ear. They separate these out because they're not always the same. In this case, they're kind of similar, so we don't need to really worry about that. So in this case, we have this line dropping down here, and this is the person with hearing loss. This is what the average graph of a person with hearing losses hearing looked like. As babies with perfect hearing, the line tends to just be a flat line on the top. You can hear everything. Perfect hearing, brilliant. Some lucky people will keep that line for their whole lives, but most people it will drop down, varying amounts. Mine actually look quite a little bit like this. Better in the low pitches and worse in the high pitches. The high pitches, on average, tend to go more. And I think the reason for that is that the higher frequency has more, energy in it, so it damages the hair cells a little bit more. I don't know. I'm not a biologist. So most people will have a graph similar to this by the time they're 70. If we look at that, 70% of people over 70 will have some form of hearing loss. Often it will look like this. So as this line drops, as we said, the line is the threshold of hearing, which means that everything underneath that line is what that person can't hear. Yeah, the grayed out area is the area of hearing loss. And as you'll notice, it kind of cuts across the area of human speech. It's not like a uniform drop. Some bits are in there and some bits aren't. And what this really shows is that deafness isn't just a uniform drop in hearing. It doesn't mean that everything is just a bit quieter. It means that there are select parts of the words that are quieter. So an example would be France. Yeah? If you take out the F and the S sound, but you keep in the A and the N, France becomes aunts. Yeah? Or aunt. So it's not just a case of just turning up the volume, because if you turn up the volume, the bits that can be heard become too loud. This is particularly true in people who have recruitment, which is where as sounds get louder, they become distorted. So turning up the volume again just kind of makes things a bit messier and painful. So it's not just about volume, it's also about clarity. There are spaces missing, and subtitles let people fill in those spaces. When people are watching subtitles, when I'm watching subtitles, I'm not just reading it as I go. I'm glancing at it and just kind of pulling bits in. So when I'm listening to it and there's something that I'm not quite making out, I just kind of pull that bit out of the subtitles and put it all together into hearing it. And that is what subtitles do. So that's why it's always a little bit frustrating when people say to me, oh, can we not just turn the volume up instead? It's like, no, you can't. Here's a slide to explain why. No. We've got a nice little video here, just kind of to demonstrate this. So we're going to play it now. Whilst this is happening, there won't be any subtitles at the bottom because it kind of defeats the point a little bit. Just so you're aware. I'm also going to make my face disappear for this little bit so you can watch it uninterrupted.
Ever wondered what life must be like for the 10 million people in our population with a hearing loss? Would you still enjoy going to the theatre or listening to a talk if you had to struggle to understand what was being said or sung? Well, try listening to this.
Sam understood all this, of course, so he said at once that he never could drink before supper unless a lady drank with him. A great deal of laughing ensued, and Mrs. Sanders volunteered to humour him, so she took a slight sip out of her glass. Then Sam said,
Was that much fun? No, we didn't think so either. How about hearing it again, but this time with captions?
Sam understood all this, of course, so he said at once that he never could drink before supper unless a lady drank with him. A great deal of laughing ensued, and Mrs. Sanders volunteered to humour him, so she took a slight sip out of her glass. Then Sam said it must go all round, so they all took a slight sip. Then little Miss Pippins proposed a toast. Success to Barbara and Pickwick. And then the ladies emptied their glasses in honour of the sentiment and got very talkative directly. I suppose you've heard that's going forward, Mr. Weller, said Mrs. Bardow.
Bit more enjoyable that time? Captioning and speech-to-text transcription give deaf, deafened and hard of hearing people access to every word of a performance or a talk. Please don't leave 1 in 6 people out of the arts. For more information, go to www.stagetext.org.
So you see what the impact of subtitles is, right? So hopefully after all that, you kind of understand a little bit more about deaf people, about the audience who you are trying to support to access your content with subtitles, yeah, and understand a little bit more about why those subtitles are important, why it's not just about volume, why it's not just about BSL. Yeah, great stuff. So that's the first section done. Thanks again for tuning in. If you found this useful, please consider donating to StageText. Everything helps. You can also support us by giving us a like and sharing this video. There's another 5 videos to come, so do go on to those next. In the meantime, if you have any burning questions, my email is oliver@stagetext.org, but your questions may be answered in some of the later videos, so maybe watch those next. See you in the next one.